So today we are going to talk about Cancer, the sign of Cancer. And it's a good time to talk about Cancer as the sun is now in Cancer. We recently had the solstice, and so we are also on the cusp of a new moon in the sign. So the sun and the moon will be in Cancer, but whenever you're listening to this will be quite appropriate. So our goal today, or intention today, is to, let's say, extend our understanding of the Cancer archetype, the Cancer energetic archetypal framework. And so meditating on the astrology, on the astrological symbols and the archetypal energies, it really allows us to open up to understand, let's say, the deeper structures of consciousness, the deeper structures of our being. And so we are saying that astrology is symbolic of deeper interior and psychic realities, and it's those things, those deeper interior and psychic realities, that we are fundamentally interested in, that the astrology captures by way of a symbolic form, a symbolic system that describes something at a deeper level. So today we are putting on the table this question of the Cancer sign energy, Cancer, of course, being the fourth sign in the progression of the zodiac. So we're going to be exploring that from another standpoint, diving deeper into the structure of this sign energy. And so Cancer would describe a basin of memory. So think about it. Imagine, if you would, a pool, a basin of memory. It's a sign to do with the roots of our identity. So if Aries, let's say, symbolically describes cardinal fire, describes this sort of initiation of our identity, here I am. Cancer would describe, let's say, a rooting process, the initiation of the, let's say, emotional constructs, the emotional response patterning. But anyway, with Cancer, we are drawing up on, let's say, a wellspring of memory. So the Cancer archetype takes us into this question of a wellspring of memory. So what is contained within the emotional memory? And that would extend to, let's say, other lines of time. You might call these other lives, but what is contained within the basin of memory of your whole identity, your whole soul identity. So Cancer would attune us to, well, what is contained within the personal unconscious that becomes personal habit patterns. Yes, so what is contained within our personal unconscious that becomes habit patterns. And so for some people, the basin of memory is stronger. It announces itself within our consciousness in a stronger kind of way, meaning that if you're someone like this, you're able to draw more strongly. You're able to draw more consciously or more strongly on the past. You're pulling up in a more conscious way or in a stronger way on, let's say, other stations of your identity within the soul record. And so Cancer points us to how these other stations of identity contained within the soul memory, how it is that these stations of identity impact the current personality structure. And so Moon Cancer, the Moon Cancer planet sign archetypal matrix are symbols that have to do with habituation, the process of forming habits. So habits that travel the highways of the psyche from one identity to the other. So we are extending, as we said, our appreciation of the Cancer energy archetype, the energy matrix that Cancer describes. So this pool of memory that contains a much broader picture of your identity and the process of forming habits along the lines of time. So the habituation process of the soul identity across multiple lines of time. And so remember that. So moon Cancer, symbols to do with habituation. And so perhaps you might think about the habits that you came in with, so to speak. So you come into a lifetime, you're born to parents, and your parents might realize that, my child has certain habits that are very particular to them. They did not inherit it from me. And so perhaps you might think about the things that you were naturally inclined to do or to pursue, or the things you were naturally interested, or just some habits that you had even very early. So the things that you felt comfortable with. Yes. And so we want to talk about Cancer from the standpoint of, and I'm coining this phrase here, let's say the biological structure of the soul, which might sound a bit paradoxical, but let's put it that way. The biological, the biospiritual structure of the soul. Because your other stations of identity are like the individual cells. So the stations of your identity that make up your soul record, that make up your total soul identity, are, let's say, like the individual cells to an overall construct. And so there is this sort of hereditary association. So think about the meaning of that word, hereditary. So the passing of genetic information from parent to child. And so from the standpoint of the structure of the soul, or let's say your larger non-physical consciousness, the larger gestalt of non-physical consciousness that your current identity belongs to, the individual identities that make up the soul are like the cells belonging to a single system. And so what happens is that there is, let's say, psychic feedback between your various stations of identity across the lines of time. And so these various stations, we would call them lifetimes, lives, other lives, past lives, but they are multi-dimensional extensions of the soul self across the lines of time. And so these individual identities that make up the soul are like cells belonging to a single system. And there's a kind of psychic feedback between your various stations of identity, and in that they cooperate with each other as cells do in a system. So the biological cell, there is cooperation between the cells in your body. And so what we are discussing and describing is this idea of seeing the soul as having a quote-unquote biological structure, so to speak. So Cancer as an archetype helps us to understand this. And so the pool of memory that you draw upon, and the pool of memory is made up of the psychic input from these various cells, these individual cells that are individual stations of the larger soul identity as expressed along the lines of time. So these cells, your individual identities, the individual identities of your larger soul construct, they cooperate together for the functioning of the entire organism. So you are part of something. Your identity is a part of something. So as you look at yourself in the mirror, you belong to a wider construct of identity, and this is, let's say, a cell within that broader construct. And so there is, in terms of soul memory, a psychic feedback mechanism between all cells within the organism, and the organism would be, let's say, your overall soul consciousness, the broader soul entity that spreads itself out into various stations of identity that you would identify as, let's say, a single lifetime. And so there is a biological structure of your non-physical consciousness that is, let's say, a mirror to the physical counterpart. So we can extrapolate from the physical structure to deeper metaphysical structures. The cells of your identity, your non-physical consciousness, the cells of your soul identity, as cells are to an organ, to your body. So there's that parallel. Because the overall soul consciousness that spreads itself out into various lines of time, various stations of identity of which you are one, that soul consciousness is simply too big. It's too big to be contained within a single lifetime. So we are getting into a larger understanding of the soul, the gestalt, the organized whole of the soul energy, which spreads itself out into these individual lines of time. The organized whole of the soul consciousness is far bigger, far too big to be contained within a single lifetime. And so we could say that the soul consciousness spreads itself out, and they're individual cell units. And so these individual cell units, they pass information between each other. And that has to do with the question of memory. So what is contained in your memory bank, that psychic pool of data, has a lot to do with the sharing of data between the cells of the soul. And so why is it important for us to understand or appreciate some of this information? Because when your sense of identity, even cognitively, when that sense of identity expands, you have access to more memory, and your sense of this sort of ossified identity, well, it begins to now dissipate. You can see more of your humanity as you realize that your soul consciousness spreads itself out in many, many contexts within simultaneous time. And so what does that mean now in terms of suggesting a framework for us to look at really healing collective issues, race issues? What does it mean that the overall soul identity spreads itself out across time and place and various biologies and racial characteristics? And so when you have access to more memory, when you can dig deeper down into the structure of your soul consciousness and understand it better, it means that you are equipped with more, that we are equipped with more to be able to deal with some of the issues on our world. And so this idea of knowing thyself, it doesn't ever get trite. One has to know oneself to be able to heal and to resolve the patterns of consciousness that are in need of healing. It depends on an understanding of the structure of our human consciousness, and the astrology gives us a symbolic archetypal framework to discuss and describe these deeper soul realities that make up the fabric of our experience of life and our identities. And so in terms of these identities, these cells, there are, let's say, stronger lines of memory association that you would have to certain identities. So in other words, the psychic lines of association between you and certain other portions of your identity, your broader soul identity, certain psychic lines of association can be stronger than others. In other words, there are certain portions of your identity with which you have a stronger psychic connection, and that is for a very great reason, good reason and purpose. In other words, the memory access that you have to those other portions of your soul consciousness, your soul identity, would serve very great purpose for the life that you're living now. In other words, those lines of memory, the psychic lines of connection between the cells of your broader soul identity, well, those lines of connection, they give you important data in the now. So you, as an individualized entity, as an individual station of your soul identity, you are connecting into other portions of your soul identity that is giving you, those are giving you important and pertinent data for the lifetime that you're living right now. And so there is a feedback and a bleed through. A feedback and a bleed through. And this is in the basin of memory that would be archetypally Cancer. Yes. So the bleed through, the psychic feedback and bleed through between cells, between counterparts of yourself, within your broader soul identity, that feedback and bleed through has very great purpose. So as an individual in your current now, you're tapping into portions of your overall soul memory that come to you from other stations of your identity, important, pertinent data to do with skill sets, to do with talents, to do with all sorts of things that are important for you to hold and access in the now. And even on a physical basis, there are often physical continuities, physical memories that carry, meaning the psychic connections between you and other portions of your soul identity. These psychic connections are carried within your physical genetic information. And so your body consciousness holds a record of who you were, so to speak, past tense, so to speak. These psychic connections between who you are in your current now, the person that you know yourself to be as you look in the mirror, the psychic connections between yourself and these other stations of your identity are, to a very great degree, the basis of your biology. In other words, your very physical, biological structure also rests on the pillar of memory and psychic feedback between you and other stations of your identity. So yes, as we discussed in our last podcast, understanding generational karma and the patterns of consciousness in the bloodline or family line. Yes, there are, let's say, ancestral inheritances passed down along the genetic line. So non-physical data that is physical held in the genetic information passed down along the genetic line. But also your biology is made up of or rests on the pillar of psychic connections between your individual site of identity, who you know yourself to be, and also the other identities that are related to you psychically, as cells are related to each other in an organ or an organism. So the point that we're making is that the memories across time, the memories and imprints of the other portions of your identity, well, these imprints and memories have a biological foundation, a biological basis. They have a biological representation in your body at the chromosome level. So who you were, so to speak, in other lines of time, in other lines of simultaneous time, other dimensions of your overall soul identity, they actually live in you at the chromosomal level. And so what we're describing here is the energetic and physical basis of habit formation within the soul awareness, meaning that certain habits are reinforced in your current now through lines of association, psychic lines of association between you and other stations of your identity along the lines of time or across the lines of time. And so that is the energetic basis of habit formation. And so Cancer, the Cancer sign archetypal energy, describes on one level this pool of psychic memory which shows up in the body at the chromosomal level. So even in terms of illness, there are patterns of illness which sometimes show up across timelines, across the stations of your various soul identities, or across the stations of your soul identity, your overall soul identity. And so illness shows up across various personalities of your overall soul consciousness, of which you are one such personality. And so in terms of Cancer, in terms of family, Cancer describes archetypally your family of origin, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings. That is one representation of the Cancer archetype in the human system. Your parents, your siblings, your family. But there is another type of, let's say, family unit. And that family unit would be the various stations of identity which are held within your overall soul consciousness, the overall soul consciousness to which you belong. And so you are related to them, to these other stations of identity, psychically and also biologically, because your biology is the physical record of your psyche. And so for those of you who are curious too, a lot of your food preferences and food, let's say proclivities, have a lot to do, a lot of your food proclivities have a lot to do with these lines of memory across the soul record. And so again, the relevance of all of this, we have to now begin to understand for ourselves the structure of our own identity, the non-physical structure of our identity. Understanding our identity from the standpoint of who we are as a non-physical consciousness, and how that non-physical consciousness translates itself into physical terms. So it is imperative for us to understand more of the structure, the inbuilt structure of our own consciousness. Right now we are in the period of Chiron being in Aries, a lot of things coming up for us collectively as Chiron is in the sign of Aries, and a lot for the US of A, which has Chiron in Aries natally, using the Sibley chart. So Chiron there in Aries as a signature pattern within the USA field of consciousness. And so Chiron in Aries, issues to do with identity coming up to be healed. Who am I? This question, this phrase rather, being thrown around a lot. I identify as. Yes. And the healing that must take place in terms of a restoration of our identity. Who are you? And why is it important for us as a collective to have a deeper sense of our identity? It would be important for us to have a deeper sense of who we are to heal and to restore a lot of the problems that we have now. Yes, Chiron in Aries, healing the pain points, healing the pain body, Chiron, in relation to who we are. Our identities, the I am that initiates itself. Yes. So issues to do with your race and your position and all the things that you would identify as. A whole psychic restructuring is taking place on the planet right now, in terms of putting on the table the imperative for us to really begin to look deeper, to not be, let's say, lazy about the structure of our own human consciousness, because a deeper understanding is going to be the thing that brings about true healing. A deeper understanding of the gestalt of your own consciousness, the structure of your own consciousness, the so-called biological structure of the soul, the biospiritual structure of the soul. There's a pattern and structure to your soul entity that you live out. And so what would it mean if you began to have a deeper pool of memory across the lines of time? Would you have more empathy for other people? Would you see things differently? Would you be less attached to a hardened sense of identity? What would open up to you if you allowed yourself to tap into this Cancerian basin of soul memory? How would it make you a better human being, understanding the structure of your own consciousness, the biospiritual structure of your own consciousness? If you saw yourself, for example, if you were able to connect into memories of other times in which perhaps you looked quite different, if you retrieved that information, that memory from the psychic pool, how would that impact you in the now? Would you have more compassion for the other human beings with whom you share the planet? That's a question. And so these things are not meant to just be esoteric information. It's meant to be practically applied to your now. And so on the individual level, have fun. See if you can identify the things that you have a memory association with. It could be certain foods or places or things that you just have an inbuilt connection to. No one taught it to you or showed it to you. And perhaps you might extend your imagination to, what other lines of my overall soul identity am I connecting into? And so you want to reinforce at the individual level first your own belonging to a larger structure of consciousness that is going to do that will have a big impact in just conditioning the cognitive level to allow certain data to make itself known to you. All right, folks, so that is all we are going to talk about today, Cancer and the idea of soul memory. And so reminding you as usual that I'm available for a range of private astrological counseling and teaching consultations, and links to that are in the description box below, where you'll also find links to other things such as my email list to stay in touch if you'd like this kind of content to be delivered to your inbox. So a few things to think about there about the Cancer energy. Wishing you a good day wherever you are, and until next time, talk soon. Bye.